Nick Tracy, raised by a strict military father and a nurturing Vietnamese homemaker, experienced a challenging childhood in a modest neighborhood. Small in stature, he was frequently bullied until his father enrolled him in Jojo Nolan's local martial arts dojo. This decision proved pivotal. Under Nolan's tutelage, Nick discovered a passion for disciplined combat, excelling in both physical and academic pursuits. By adulthood, resilience and intelligence defined him. A top graduate with degrees in mathematics, computer science, and business, he built a stable life, meeting his future wife, Annie, in college. Their shared intellectual curiosity and ambition made them a formidable pair. They crafted a life balancing her rapid ascent in finance with his adaptable programming career. However, beneath the veneer of their seemingly perfect partnership lay unspoken doubts and concealed truths, both soon to be severely tested. Feeling somewhat out of place, yet unwilling to let Annie attend alone, Nick accompanied her to a lavish gathering hosted by Mike White, a former football star turned investment mogul. Nick harbored reservations about the event and Annie's eagerness to attend, but she insisted. Mike, a celebrated retired midfielder who led his team to a championship the previous year, had leveraged his fame into financial success, particularly within investments once managed by Annie's firm and later overseen by Annie herself. 30-year-old Annie, a financial whiz at Bragg Inc., a firm catering to athletes and celebrities, is a striking blonde who married Nick 8 years prior during their college years. They have a 7-year-old son, Travis, who is Nick's image. Nearly 6 feet tall with a medium build, Nick appears affable, but his past is more complex. As a child, he was small, impoverished, and a frequent target of bullies. His father, Greg, was a career Army sergeant, and his mother, Nora, a second-generation Vietnamese housewife. Nora adored Nick, but couldn't shield him from neighborhood tormentors. At age 7, after losing a race and returning home battered, Nick's father introduced him to Jojo Nolan's dojo. Jojo emphasized fighting, not just self-defense. Under his guidance, Nick transformed his ingrained anger and resentment into disciplined combat skills. Though small, Nick was quick, strong, and remarkably intelligent, excelling academically and consistently achieving top marks. The dojo became his refuge. He trained relentlessly, mastering techniques prioritizing precision over emotional outbursts. By age 9, he confidently defended himself against older bullies, gaining respect and ending the abuse. He eventually grew taller and stronger, and Jojo adapted his training to maintain Nick's agility. At 18, Nick graduated high school a skilled fighter. His academic excellence earned him a university scholarship where he pursued mathematics, computer science, and business. Nick met Annie in their junior-senior year business classes. Their shared intellect and interests sparked a rapid connection that blossomed into a deeply compatible relationship. Both adventurous and inquisitive, they sought thrills but remained devoted to each other. Occasional fantasies arose, Nick picturing Annie as Jamie Lee Curtis in Blue Steel, Annie indulging her own private whims. But these remained strictly fantasy. They formalized their commitment with a handwritten, signed promise and married after graduation. Annie quickly thrived at Bragg Inc., earning a substantial income, while Nick worked from home as a computer programmer. After Travis's birth, Nick became the primary caregiver, balancing parenting with programming. Recognizing Annie's business acumen, he invested a bonus in one of her recommended startups, Magnetism, a platform connecting singles and like-minded individuals. The venture flourished, and Nick profited significantly when it went public, retiring shortly after, anticipating market saturation. He advised Annie to withdraw her clients, accelerating the startup's decline. Quietly, Nick executed a controversial short sale, further increasing his wealth, a secret he kept from Annie. 5 years into their marriage, Nick noticed Annie's increasing absences from home, while he, in turn, concealed his business ventures. He established his own programming firm, securing classified government contracts requiring security clearance. Through this, he uncovered revealing information about Annie. She earned far more than he imagined, with investments in her company's accounts that were publicly documented but never discussed at home. Despite her financial expertise, Annie remained technologically naive, leaving her digital life accessible to Nick. They maintained separate tax filings and contributions, but Nick realized her silence about her financial dealings mirrored his own secrecy. Nick refrained from excessive probing into Annie's professional life. However, after discovering her investment account, he searched her laptop and phone. He found work-related plans, but no evidence of infidelity. Annie appeared focused on her job and the high-profile clients she represented. Together, they attended parties hosted by actors. Athletes, musicians, and wealthy elites hosted parties Nick and Annie attended about 5 or 6 times annually. Nick generally enjoyed these events, though Annie often became engrossed in business once there. She always returned home with him and never acted suspiciously. Their intimate life remained strong, though Nick occasionally sensed her distraction, perhaps once a month. These moments fueled his surveillance, but he ultimately attributed her absences to work. Life continued as usual until Annie acquired Mike White, the former football star turned investment mogul, as a client. Mike, married to actress Jill Slayton, had 2 daughters, ages 6 and 8. Annie replaced Jake Blake, a notorious flirt whose attempts to seduce Jill led to his reassignment. Mike specifically requested a female advisor, though Annie remained unaware he'd requested her specifically. After taking on Mike as a client, Annie spent even more time at work, occasionally joining him and Jill for lunch. Aware of Mike's attraction to Annie, Jill attended these lunches to assess the situation. She recognized Mike's interest extended beyond professional boundaries, but surprisingly, didn't object to his pursuit of Annie. Jill desired an affair with her upcoming co-star and rationalized that if Mike became involved with Annie, he couldn't criticize her own actions, as long as discretion was maintained. At lunch, Jill observed Mike's evident interest in Annie and wondered if Annie might eventually succumb. She knew Annie was married with a child, but doubted Nick, a seemingly average stay-at-home dad, would pose much of an obstacle. In Jill's mind, Annie's choices were her own, and any consequences would be Annie's responsibility. Jill and Mike had been married for almost a decade. In their early years, both had been unfaithful while traveling, but 6 years prior, they discovered each other's affairs and committed to rebuilding their marriage. They succeeded, but now Mike was captivated by Annie. Jill, accustomed to male attention, recently felt tempted by Dirk, her co-star. She reasoned a brief fling wouldn't ruin their marriage. "We both love our children," she thought. "We'll forgive each other, maybe even reach a new understanding." Mike remained one of the best lovers Jill had ever known, and she valued their chemistry, but she also believed some variety could enhance their relationship. On the drive home after dinner, she teased him. "Do you want that woman? Don't bother denying it. I saw everything." Mike sighed. "I'm sorry. We made a promise, and I'll keep it." "Really?" Jill smirked. "What if I let you go? Will you let me go?" "You know, for Dirk." Mike bristled. "Because of him? I don't believe the rumors about his so-called manhood." Jill shrugged coyly. "No first-hand experience yet, but we'll be working together for 2 months. If he turns out to be a disappointment, it might just be a one-time thing." Mike frowned. "I don't agree. We have a family, and we'll protect it. I'll always love you the most. Nothing else will change that." "Sure," Jill replied, "but I know you're going to try for Annie. She's married with a child, and don't forget about me." Mike gave her a sharp look. "Are you suggesting some sort of trade?" "Something like that," Jill quipped. "You keep it discreet. No scandals, no news. That's my condition. If Dirk breaks it, I'll tell him you're a jealous husband with armed friends." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe. But what if Annie doesn't give in? No trades needed, just a refusal." "You doubt me?" Jill grinned. "Men are so simple. Watch and see." Annie quickly became the focus of Mike White's attention. After lunch, she returned to her office, fully aware of the undercurrents. Though outwardly composed, she recognized Mike's visible excitement during their meal, a detail Jill likely noticed as well. Annie questioned whether his reaction stemmed from her or Jill, concluding it was her, not his wife of 10 years, regardless of Jill's beauty. Annie faced a dilemma. Keeping Mike's account would boost her career, but she didn't truly need it. She admitted to herself that Mike's confidence, strength, and overt interest intrigued her. Nick, her husband, was also strong but lacked Mike's boldness. She'd even noticed Mike's physique during lunch, further piquing her curiosity. Still, she had a loving family, and knew an affair would shatter her marriage and devastate Nick. Despite the temptation, Annie resolved to reject Mike. Mike, however, was relentless. As Jill's filming date approached, his pursuit of Annie intensified, initially subtle, then increasingly overt. His advances left her conflicted. Annie was drawn to him, but continually rebuffed him. One day, after a business meeting, she allowed him to kiss her. The kiss was passionate, but she pulled away, retreating behind her desk, breathless. "No, Mike," Annie said firmly, holding back tears. "I promised Nick, and I won't break it." Disappointed, Mike accepted her refusal and left, frustrated. He channeled his emotions into his relationship with Jill, who welcomed his intensity. That night, their passion reignited, leaving them both drained and satisfied. Lying in bed afterward, Jill remarked with a smirk, "Your financial advisor is really keeping you on edge, and to my benefit, I'm rooting for her, not you. But if she pushes you any further, I might have to escape the storm myself." Jill was teasing Mike, and he knew it. "Why not leave her alone?" Jill said. "She's clearly devoted to her husband, which is admirable. If you succeed, she'll end up looking foolish, and not just because of you." Mike frowned. "I can't let this go while you're off with some stallion." Jill smirked. "I doubt he's anything special. But even if he is, you won't stop chasing Annie, will you?" Jill said, provoking Mike further. "I told you, if Dirk isn't great, it'll only happen once." "Maybe I should eliminate him," Mike muttered darkly. "I get so worked up about Annie." Jill laughed. "Wait until filming's over. A mysterious end right before release would boost ticket sales." They both chuckled at the absurdity. Mike remained fixated on Annie, convinced she reciprocated his attraction. Their kiss lingered in his mind. Her reaction confirmed it, but he wouldn't force her. With Jill about to begin filming, Mike devised a plan and approached Annie. "Annie," he began, "I respect your commitment to your marriage, but I know you feel the same pull I do. Hear me out." Annie grew wary. "What is it?" "I want to throw a party at Black Rock with some fun guests. Remember Nick's fantasy about Jamie Lee Curtis? Well, the actress playing Jill's temptress in her new movie looks just like her. She might come to the party," Mike explained, showing Annie a picture. Annie raised an eyebrow. "And what's your angle?" Mike continued. "Samantha Jordan, 24 and adventurous, could flirt with Nick while dressed the part. Meanwhile, Jill will be busy with Dirk, her co-star. After the party, Samantha could take Nick upstairs, while Jill and Dirk do the same. Then you and I could stay behind." Annie's voice dripped with sarcasm. "So you want me to cheat on my husband while he's seduced by a starlet?" "Very creative, Mike." Mike shrugged. "It'd be discreet. A cozy weekend setup. Everyone gets what they want. An orgy." Annie scoffed. "Nick won't go for it, and he'll figure out I set him up. He's not the forgiving type." "Would he hurt you?" Mike asked, half concerned, half curious. Annie shook her head. "Not physically. But don't worry. He's smaller than you, and practices at some dojo. I always have security at these events anyway. Let's just say, Nick Angry isn't someone you want to deal with." Mike smiled as he leaned closer to Annie in their dimly lit booth. He kissed her, and as she turned, her hand brushed against his arousal. She didn't pull away, but kissed him back. For a moment, he thought he could have her right there, but it was too risky. Annie gently pushed him away, whispering, "Oh my God, Mike. Damn." She pressed the button for the waiter, who quickly noticed the tension but said nothing. Mike paid the bill, and they left. Driving back, Annie contemplated the upcoming Black Rock party on Friday, an event teeming with musicians, actors, athletes, and possibly their spouses. She worried about persuading Nick to attend, knowing he wasn't open to sharing or experimental situations. Their signed promise guaranteed that, and she knew he'd immediately suspect something if she over-explained beforehand. That evening, over Nick's signature roast chicken dinner, Annie broached the subject. Nick, Mike, and Jill are hosting a party before Jill leaves for filming. Lots of celebrities will be there. We're invited. It's Friday. Nick looked at her, already suspicious. He knew about Mike's advances and had even considered confronting him, but chose to trust Annie instead. However, his sources confirmed Mike's persistence and Annie's repeated rejections, though not without hesitation. "Annie," Nick said bluntly, "Mike's after you. From what I hear, close to crossing the line. That would be a disaster for us." "I haven't done anything with him," Annie replied firmly. "He approaches, and I say no." "Maybe," Nick countered, "but not a strong no. And you never told me about it." "Nick, I want to go to this party, and I want you with me." "I'm not changing my mind," Annie insisted. "I think you should drop him as a client," Nick suggested. "This is going in the wrong direction. Maybe he needs a male advisor instead. Your company has options." "I won't drop him," Annie admitted. "Yes, he's tempting, but I'm not giving in. I want to go to the party, and nothing will happen." Nick frowned. "I don't trust him. He'll try something, and it could get ugly. Nick, he's a grown man. There will be security. I can handle myself." "No offense," Annie said, trying to reassure him. Annie knew Nick attended a dojo, but didn't realize his skill level or the extent of his suppressed rage. She also underestimated the potential volatility of the party. Fully aware of the risks, Nick agreed to attend, intending to confront Mike and end the tension once and for all. On Friday, Nick dropped Travis off at his parents' house for the weekend. Black Rock, Mike and Jill's expansive estate, boasted a lake, mansion, ballroom, and other luxurious amenities. The party was scheduled for 7:00 p.m., casual attire. Annie descended the stairs in a navy blue dress, both understated and strikingly seductive. Nick, dressed in slacks and a silk shirt, eyed her wearily. "This dress screams, 'We should stay home and have sex,'" he said. Annie blushed. "Do you think I look good?" "You know you do," he replied. "I'm just wondering who you dressed up for." "For you, baby." "Only you," she said, smiling. Nick wasn't convinced but played along. He turned on Phil Collins's Live Tonight, a song he used during dojo training. The rhythm fueled him as he pulled Annie into an impromptu dance before leading her outside. Once at the door, Nick kicked a high branch from a tulip poplar, brimming with energy. On the drive to Black Rock, the song played in his mind. At the estate, he insisted on parking himself, choosing a spot for a quick exit. "You won't stop chasing Annie, will you?" Jill said, further provoking Mike. "I told you, if Dirk isn't great, it'll only happen once." "Maybe I should eliminate him," Mike muttered darkly. "I get so worked up about Annie." Jill laughed. "Wait until filming's over. A mysterious end right before release would boost ticket sales." They both chuckled at the dark humor. Mike remained fixated on Annie, convinced their attraction was mutual. Their kiss replayed in his mind. Her reaction confirmed it for him. He wouldn't force her, though. With Jill's filming about to start, Mike hatched a plan and approached Annie. "Annie," he began, "I respect your commitment, but I know you feel the same pull I do. Hear me out." Annie grew cautious. "What is it?" "I'm throwing a party at Black Rock with some interesting guests. Remember Nick's fantasy about Jamie Lee Curtis? The actress playing Jill's temptress in her new movie is a dead ringer. She might come." Mike showed Annie a picture. Annie raised an eyebrow. "And your point is?" Mike continued. "Samantha Jordan, 24 and adventurous, could entertain Nick, dress the part. Jill will be occupied with Dirk, her co-star. After the party, Samantha could take Nick upstairs while Jill and Dirk do the same. Then you and I. Annie's voice dripped with sarcasm. So you want me to cheat on my husband while he's seduced by a look-alike? Brilliant, Mike. Mike shrugged. Discreet. A cozy weekend arrangement. Everyone gets what they want. Annie scoffed. Nick won't fall for it, and he'll know I set him up. He doesn't forgive easily. Would he hurt you? Mike asked, a mixture of concern and curiosity in his voice. Annie shook her head. Not physically. But don't worry, he's smaller than you, and he practices at some dojo. I always have security. Let's just say you don't want to see Nick angry. Mike smiled, leaning closer in the dimly lit booth. He kissed her, and as she turned, her hand brushed against his arousal. She didn't pull away, kissing him back momentarily. He thought he had her, but it was too risky. Annie gently pushed him away, whispering, "Oh my God, Mike." Damn. She pressed the waiter's button. He arrived, sensing the tension, but remaining silent. Mike paid, and they left. Driving home, Annie thought about the Black Rock party on Friday, an event packed with celebrities and their spouses. Convincing Nick to attend would be difficult. He wasn't interested in open relationships. Their signed promise ensured that. He'd suspect something if she explained too much. That evening, over Nick's signature roast chicken, Annie casually mentioned the party. Nick, Mike, and Jill are having a party before Jill starts filming. Lots of celebrities. We're invited. It's Friday. Nick looked at her suspiciously. He knew of Mike's pursuit and considered confronting him, but chose to trust Annie. However, his sources confirmed Mike's persistence and Annie's hesitant rejections. Annie, Nick said bluntly, Mike's after you. He's been pushing the boundaries. This could blow up in our faces. I haven't done anything, Annie insisted. He tries, and I say no. Maybe, Nick countered, but not convincingly. And you never told me. Nick, I want to go, and I want you with me. End of discussion. Drop him as a client, Nick suggested. This is getting messy. Get a male advisor. Your company has plenty. I'm not dropping him, Annie said. He's tempting, but I'm not giving in. I want to go to the party, and nothing is going to happen. Nick frowned. I don't trust him. He'll pull something, and it could get ugly. He's a grown man. There'll be security. I can handle myself, Annie reassured him. She knew Nick trained at a dojo but underestimated his skill and the rage he held within. She also underestimated the party's potential for chaos. Knowing the risks, Nick agreed to go, intending to confront Mike and end the charade. On Friday, Nick dropped Travis at his parents'. Black Rock, Mike and Jill's opulent estate, boasted a lake, mansion, ballroom, and every luxury imaginable. The party began at 7:00 p.m., casual attire. Annie descended the stairs in a navy blue dress, understated yet alluring. Nick, in slacks and a silk shirt, eyed her wearily. That dress says, "Stay home and have sex," he commented. Annie blushed. Do you think I look good? You know you do. I'm just wondering who you dressed up for. For you, baby. Only you, she smiled. Nick remained skeptical but played along. He put on Phil Collins's Live Tonight, a song from his dojo training days. The rhythm energized him as he pulled Annie into an impromptu dance before heading out. At the door, he kicked a high branch off a tulip poplar, brimming with nervous energy. The song played in his mind on the drive to Black Rock. He insisted on parking, choosing a spot for a quick escape, and tipping the valet for extra care. Annie noticed his heightened awareness. Why the song? And that kick? You're acting like you're preparing for war. Nick simply replied, That's all. At the entrance, Mike and Jill greeted them. Jill embraced Nick warmly while Mike hugged Annie, complimenting her appearance. He then turned to Nick, extending a hand with a dominant grip. Nick matched it, forcing Mike to release without injury. Nice to meet you, Mike, Nick said, smiling. From that grip, maybe I haven't heard enough about you from Annie. The tension hung heavy before Jill ushered them inside, The party buzzed with celebrities. Nick observed while Annie, in her element, chatted with a boxer. Avoiding alcohol, Nick sipped seltzer and waited. He watched Mike approach Annie, taking her elbow. She turned, smiling seductively, but her words made Mike tense. Glancing back, Mike saw Jill, who waved and briefly disappeared, returning with a stunning woman who resembled Jamie Lee Curtis. It stopped Nick in his tracks. "Nick, this is Samantha Jordan, my co-star. She's incredibly talented." Nick, momentarily speechless, finally managed, "Hello. You're amazing." Samantha, used to admiration, was surprised by Nick's genuine reaction. She smiled, instantly drawn to him. Jill had downplayed Nick as ordinary, but Samantha disagreed. He radiated strength and confidence. Jill noticed Samantha's fascination, realizing it was genuine. Samantha took Nick's elbow and led him to the pool for privacy. Despite her role in the evening scheme, she found herself genuinely interested in Nick. They talked, exchanging questions and lingering glances. The more they spoke, the stronger Samantha's undeniable attraction grew, which she didn't hide. Meanwhile, Annie danced with Mike, noticing Nick and Samantha's conversation. After 2 dances, she and Mike joined Jill and Dirk at the bar. "How did Nick react to Samantha?" Annie asked Jill. Jill hesitated. "I think they fell for each other. I've never seen anything like it." Alarmed, Annie asked, "Where are they?" "By the pool," Jill replied. Annie found them, witnessing their undeniable chemistry. She turned to Jill. "Is she acting, or is this real?" "It's real. She's smitten. Your plan to distract Nick worked better than expected. Mike's all yours now." "Damn it," Annie muttered. Samantha, realizing her true feelings, decided to be honest with Nick. "Nick, I can't do this. I have strong feelings for you, and I want this to be real. If you feel the same, call me, and maybe we can figure things out." "I'll call you, Sam," Nick responded. "You're the woman of my dreams." Samantha kissed him quickly and left. Nick watched her walk away, captivated. Her rhythm matched the beat of his fight song, now playing in his mind. Determined, he went to find Annie, vowing to stop whatever she planned with Mike. Nick entered the dance floor and saw Annie slow dancing with Mike. The space had cleared, leaving only them, Jill, and Dirk swaying to the music. Jill and Dirk kissed openly, while Mike, less subtle, pulled Annie closer. Annie felt conflicted, torn between loyalty and temptation. As Mike kissed her, his actions grew more suggestive. Annie, overwhelmed, started to lose herself in the moment. Nick appeared, moving to the rhythm of his song. 2 guards approached, but he ignored them, confident they were all size and no skill. He tapped Mike on the shoulder. "I'm cutting in," Nick said calmly. Mike sneered. "Go find Sam. Tonight, Annie is mine. Sam's gone. I sent her away. Annie's my wife, and she's free." "So back off," Nick replied firmly. Mike stepped away, signaling his guards. Nick turned to Annie. "You set me up," he said coldly. "If you stay here, we're done. No turning back. I won't let you destroy our family for one night. And if I have to end this by force, I will." The room froze. Mike, sensing Nick's seriousness, struggled to see how he could back up his threat. Annie, shaken, felt her earlier desire evaporate. "I don't understand why you couldn't go along with this. You liked Samantha. You could have enjoyed yourself." Nick's voice was sharp. "We made promises. I keep mine, and you will keep yours. If you want something else, we'll divorce. But not this." Jill intervened. "Mike, let it go. I'm not sleeping with Dirk. Leave it." "No," Mike growled. "This guy's bluffing." He turned to Annie. "Do you want to leave with him?" Annie, trembling, said, "I have to. If I don't, something terrible will happen." Furious, Mike ordered the guards, "Throw them out. Now!" The guards grabbed Nick. Annie stood frozen. In less than 10 seconds, Nick took them down. He stomped on one foot, punched the other in the throat, then struck the first guard in the throat as well. Both crumpled. Nick's song roared in his head, the drums fueling his movements. He turned to Mike, who now burned with fear. For the first time, Mike realized he was outmatched. Desperately, he swung at Nick, who dodged effortlessly, laughing, swaying to the rhythm. Nick struck Mike hard in the groin, then delivered a precise blow under the ear. Mike collapsed, utterly defeated. Everything happened quickly. The women were stunned by Nick's swift takedown of the security guards, barely reacting before he felled Mike with a second blow. Nick moved rhythmically, each action precise. He raised his leg above Mike, but Annie, realizing Nick intended to seriously injure him, screamed, "No, Nick! No, Nick! He's not worth it!" Nick heard her, not the words, but the primal fear in her voice, and hesitated. Mike, though down, wasn't out. A seasoned athlete, he scrambled to his feet and fled toward the pool. Panicked, he ran straight into the deep end, hitting his head on the diving board. He couldn't swim, but it didn't matter. He was already unconscious. Jill followed, screaming when she saw Mike submerged. "He can't swim!" Nick and Annie rushed over. Seeing Mike drowning, Nick kicked off his boots, dove in, and pulled him to the surface. He dragged Mike to the edge, pushing him onto the concrete at the women's feet. Nick climbed out, swiftly turned Mike onto his side, and pressed on his chest, expelling water from his lungs. Mike coughed, water spilling out. "Call 911!" Nick yelled to Jill, who ran inside. Mike coughed weakly, gasping for air. Nick checked him, ensuring he was stable, then stepped back. Annie stared at Nick, numb. Nick checked the guards. They were alive but needed medical attention. Soaking wet, Nick sat on the steps and waited for the police and paramedics. Soon, sirens wailed. Amid the commotion, Nick saw the guards walking, though they were still loaded into ambulances. Mike, conscious and out of danger, was carried out on a stretcher. Jill approached Nick. "Let me get you some dry clothes. Come with me." He followed her upstairs to the master bedroom. She pulled out an oversized t-shirt and sweater. Nick moved toward the bathroom, but Jill stopped him. "Change here. I want to see what she gave up." Nick stripped, leaving his shoes by the pool. He peeled off his socks, then dropped his trousers, standing in damp boxers. His eyes met Jill's. She smiled faintly. Hesitantly, he removed his boxers, his arousal evident. Jill's gaze lingered, studying him intently, before she tossed him sweatpants. Nick caught them, deliberately turning to give Jill a full view before pulling on the clothes. "You're in perfect shape," Jill observed, her tone appreciative. "Almost too good to be true. What's Annie's problem with you?" Nick shrugged. "How would I know? Maybe she's holding out for someone bigger, a famous athlete or something. Honestly, I think she just got worn down by him." Jill tilted her head. "He is attractive, though, isn't he?" "Yeah, he is," Nick admitted, then added, glancing at her. "You know, Jill, if you ever need someone to talk to, you can call me." Jill's lips curved slightly. "I might take you up on that, though Samantha, she's the wild card. She's naughty, unpredictable. Mark my words, she'll be a star. She's got something special." Jill laughed. Maybe Annie overestimated herself. "But you have a kid, Nick. I stayed with Mike for the kids, and he's good looking. Still. On set, I plan to hook up with Dirk. Where is he anyway? Haven't seen him since this started." Nick snorted. "Big action hero. He bolted the second the guards went down. Doubt you want him now. Mike probably doesn't want Annie anymore either. But maybe you're into Samantha." "Could be," Jill quipped. "What goes around comes around." Nick smiled. "If you need me for anything, I'll help. Always." She laughed. "Let's see what happens with Annie and Sam." They headed downstairs as Annie emerged from speaking with the police. She eyed them suspiciously. "What are you two up to?" "You look guilty." "Look who's talking," Jill retorted. I gave Nick a change of clothes and watched him change. "You're an idiot, Annie." Jill walked off. A detective approached Nick. He was an older, weary-looking man, accompanied by a sharply dressed, attractive young woman. Their badges read, "Stevens and Bright." Stevens took the lead. "Are you some kind of magician?" No, but I'm good at what I do. I was small as a kid, so I had to learn, Nick replied. Tell us what happened, Stevens requested. Nick recounted the events precisely, his memory sharp despite the elapsed time. At the end, Bright asked, "Were you planning to kill Mr. White?" "Hard to say. My wife screamed, and it broke my rhythm. After that, I couldn't go through with it," Nick replied. "So you saved his life?" Bright continued. "I couldn't just watch him drown. I wasn't in liquidating mode anymore. Besides, if he were dead, I'd have bigger problems." "He threw the first punch, or tried to," Nick explained. "That's what they all say," Stevens interjected. "But he only did that after you took out the security guards." "Yes, that's true. I've told you everything as it happened." "Are you arresting me?" Nick asked bluntly. "No, not now. That's up to the prosecutor," Stevens replied. "But this case will attract attention. The new prosecutor is a liberal, so it's hard to predict what she'll decide." "So I can go home?" Nick asked. "Yes. Just so you know, this house is covered in surveillance cameras. We're downloading the footage. We'll contact you if we need anything else," Stevens said. Nick nodded. "Don't hold Mike White's attempted punch against him. He's useless." Bright chuckled, but Stevens remained serious. Nick wasn't joking. He walked to the main landing where Annie sat with Jill on the stairs. Looking at Annie, he said, "I'm leaving. You can come with me or not," and turned to Jill. "Jill, thanks for an interesting evening." Jill smiled. "I hope the next part is a little more low-key, and I hope you two make up." She looked pointedly at Annie. "I meant what I said. He's incredible. You were foolish in your own way. Samantha wouldn't be so foolish if she got her chance." Annie and Nick left. They arrived home at 2:30 a.m. Annie showered first, then Nick. By the time he emerged, she was asleep. He followed suit. They both overslept on Saturday. Nick woke around 10 o'clock a.m., hungry, and made breakfast. He'd only had a small salad at the party. Annie appeared as he ate cereal, wearing an old, sleeveless pink dress she knew Nick loved. He glanced at her and returned to his bowl. After a moment, he said, "I'm not that easy. And even if I were, it would just be sex." Annie smiled. "That would be a good start. Just say the word. I owe you, and I'm ready to pay, and pay, and pay." Nick was captivated, but his mind wandered to Samantha. Meanwhile, Annie ate thoughtfully. "I'm sorry for conspiring against you," she said. "It was wrong, and I hope you'll forgive me someday. Until then, you can ask for anything." She gave him a quick once-over. Nick shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "In the last 24 hours, 2 movie stars and my incredibly sexy wife have thrown themselves at me. Somehow, I've resisted. Can't say you'd have done the same if I'd left you alone with Mike." "Mike?" Annie scoffed. "He's all brute strength." Nick chuckled. "Yeah, that's what I thought too. But you strike him like a drum. I mean, I knew you could handle him in the dojo, but still, damn, Annie, you're good at a lot of things." "Maybe I just don't talk about it much," Nick said. "Remember what I told you about my hobby?" "I do," she said. "Can I come to the dojo with you?" "For what?" Nick asked, raising an eyebrow. She flushed. "Because it's sexy. You knocking people out." I nearly climaxed. "I'm like putty in your hands." She stood, letting her dress fall to the floor, revealing her vulnerability and confidence. Nick took her in, sensing the renewed passion between them. Rising, he approached her, his gaze steady. She met him halfway, their embrace rekindling the energy between them. He lifted her and carried her to the sofa, their movements filled with anticipation. They shared a moment of profound intimacy, their connection deepening as they explored the intensity of their renewed bond. They reached a shared crescendo, leaving them breathless and fulfilled. Nick knew her newfound passion was genuine. She'd never been cold, but their intimacy had grown stale. Now something had reignited in both of them. As Nick reflected, his mind drifted to the actresses, Samantha especially. She was intoxicating, a dangerous temptation. Jill, too, the way she'd looked at him. She'd be his if he wanted. Nick realized he could have any woman he desired. But at what cost? Physically assaulting their partners? That wasn't sustainable. He needed to think carefully. Not all women would appreciate their partners being knocked out and then seduced. That much was clear. It wasn't exactly civilized. Annie grinned mischievously, caressing Nick. "Oh, we're going to have so much fun." Saturday was a blur of passion, leaving Nick utterly drained by 10 o'clock p.m. I won the sex marathon. Annie cheered triumphantly. "You were a good competitor, but a woman always has the advantage." She thought privately, "Let's plan the next one," and giggled as she drifted off to sleep. Had Nick known her thoughts, he wouldn't have been so relaxed. Sunday began quietly. Annie made pancakes, and they enjoyed them with real maple syrup. Playfully, she held up the last pancake. "Looks like my eyes were bigger than my stomach. Want to finish it for me?" Nick chuckled and accepted, savoring the sweetness. Annie leaned closer, brushing syrup on his cheek, and laughed at his startled expression. She straddled him on the carpet, their playful teasing turning into an affectionate embrace. They shared a tender, intimate connection, their laughter and closeness drawing them together. Moments later, they lay content, smiling, their bond reaffirmed. Real Vermont maple syrup. "Nothing better," she joked. Sunday passed quietly, the mood subdued. Tired, they walked in the park and shared a simple picnic. No pancakes this time. Back home, the silence stretched until Annie hesitantly broke it. "Are we okay? About Friday?" she whispered. "No," Nick replied bluntly. Annie stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "We love each other." Nick's expression hardened. "You plotted to have us break our vows. I'm still processing that. And you know I have other options. Like Sam." Annie sighed, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I know, damn it." "Yes. Yes." Nick's voice sharpened. "You used what you know about me to manipulate me, just so Mike could sleep with you. Was it only about lust?" Annie hesitated. He was persistent. And yes, he's attractive. Nick's gaze intensified. "But don't you think that if your plan had worked, we'd have broken up anyway?" "No," she said firmly, meeting his eyes. "Why not?" Nick pressed, disbelief edging his voice. "Because of trust. Because of respect." "Respect?" Nick repeated, his tone unwavering. Annie looked down. "I never really thought about it like that." "When Mike went after me, you stepped toward him," Nick continued, anger seeping in. "I assumed you were willing to let them throw me out." "Nick, she stammered. "They were big guys," she said weakly. "Yeah, and once they threw me out, you would have slept with Mike. That would have been the end of our marriage. Lust or not, it would have been over. And that humiliates me." "I won't let myself be in that position again," Nick stated firmly. "I thought we loved each other. But when you saw Mike as a way to eliminate me, you stepped toward him. That's what hurts." Annie burst into tears and ran upstairs. Nick didn't follow. They both knew he was right. Left alone, Nick had a few beers and watched baseball, a welcome distraction. After the game, he considered his options. Stay with Annie, pursue Samantha, sleep with Jill, or maybe all three? No. Fantasies like that led to disaster. He knew that much. Nick went upstairs, kissed Annie's forehead, and fell asleep beside her. When they woke, he kissed her again but said nothing. They dressed, and Annie left for work. On Monday, Nick called Samantha. "I've decided to try staying with Annie for now," he told her, "but call me when you're back from filming." Samantha's voice was warm. "Annie's a lucky woman, but if things ever go too far, don't hesitate to call me." "I will," Nick promised. He then dialed Jill. How's Mike doing? Jill sighed. He'll be discharged today, but, well, his reproductive organs are still swollen. Nick chuckled. I'm not surprised. I'd like to talk to him. Could you ask him to call me? I'm not looking for a fight. I'll ask. I'm picking him up now, Jill replied. Later, Nick visited Mike and Jill's apartment. Mike was on the couch. What do you want? Sorry, I can't stand up. I've decided to try and save my marriage, Nick began. I'm not thrilled with how much effort you put into ruining it, but I get it. Big star, big ego. Mike sighed. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was an asshole to you and Annie, but I'm not always like this. Why now? Nick asked. Because Annie is gorgeous, smart, and sexy, Mike admitted. If she's still working as your consultant, maybe you should get rid of her. I will. It's bad for both of us if I don't. Especially for me, Nick said pointedly. Agreed, Mike replied. I'll behave. Keep your word, Nick said before leaving. Jill, overhearing, chimed in. Don't worry, I'll make sure Mike is taken care of. I'll take him with me to the shoot and keep him busy so you don't have to deal with his excessive enthusiasm. Nick smirked. He's lucky, and he knows it. Isn't that right, Mike? I know, Mike replied. I just lost sight of it for a while. By the way, Nick, thanks for pulling me out of the pool. But why did you? Nick explained. I couldn't watch you drown, but if you look at the footage, you'll notice I hesitated before diving in. Mike nodded. I don't know what to make of you. My groin hurts like hell, but at least I'm alive. It wasn't an easy situation. Look, I have no issue with you as long as you leave Annie alone, Nick said honestly. I'm not sure if I'll stay with her. If I don't, you'll have your chance. But ask first. Mike looked confused. Why would you leave her? I don't get it. The recent stunt, where she plotted for you to sleep with her, is a big reason. If I weren't as capable as I am, your guards would have kicked me out. Then where would Annie have spent the night? Mike admitted, I don't have an answer to that. Jill interjected, I bet she would have gone home with you. Annie doesn't want to leave the marriage. I wanted my stud to sleep with her here, while you got to be with Sam. A dream scenario. But once Sam left, the plan fell apart. Still, Annie stepped toward Mike. I saw it on video. You should watch it too. Nick nodded thoughtfully. Maybe she would have come with me, but maybe not. I honestly don't know what to believe. When it comes to lust and sex, Jill said, women are just as susceptible as men. Mike spent so much effort trying to seduce Annie. She wanted him, but fought it hard. She never went to a motel or let him have her the way he wanted. You got to give her credit. Mike added, yeah, she resisted, but I'm not invisible. Nick sighed. Okay, I'll give her credit. Maybe I'm overthinking it. We were fine for so long, but things got so messed up. Jill changed the subject by the way, Sam asked about you. Nick raised an eyebrow. Oh, she's still into you. I told her what happened. She practically climaxed over the phone hearing the details, Jill teased. What's with women? Is this some caveman instinct? Beat the husband? Claim the wife? Nick shrugged. I think it's in the genes. When a woman realizes you control the outcome, she wants you. That includes Annie. And me, too, Jill admitted, her gaze lingering on Nick. Mike growled in protest but couldn't do much, still in pain. Nick stood. I think I better leave. Jill, you're one of the options I'm considering, but I need to talk to Annie first. Nick left, feeling both excited and unsettled. When Annie got home, Nick took her upstairs immediately while Travis watched TV. Nick tossed Annie onto the bed and took her passionately, not focused on her pleasure, but she still climaxed powerfully. As she caught her breath, he stood and asked casually, So, how was your day? Annie laughed playfully. What's for dinner? Pizza, Nick replied. Annie grinned mischievously. Then screw me again, she teased. This time they took their time, savoring the moment. Later, after dinner, Travis went to study. Annie, looking thoughtful, turned to Nick. "Are we okay? I can't help how I react to you being such an alpha male. I guess Jill feels the same way." Nick smirked, pride flickering in his eyes. "Yeah. And now you've outdone her husband, the former alpha male." Annie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "How is he, by the way?" "He'll recover," Nick said. "But his groin's still swollen. Jill's taking him along to the shoot." Annie chuckled. "Cute. She's babying him. And now he gets to avoid dealing with Dirk." Despite Annie's submissiveness, Nick felt strangely tired of always getting his way. It created a conflict within him. 6 weeks later, Jill and Mike invited Nick and Annie to another Black Rock party, this time with the film's cast and crew. Both felt hesitant but decided to go. Unlike last time, the guests were mainly film professionals, with Mike the only athlete present. Nick parked and handed the valet the keys. Jill greeted them at the door, Samantha trailing behind with a handsome, dark-haired man. "Welcome. Sam, you know Annie and Nick. Guys, this is Vince Cap. He's in the film, too." "Unless I get cut during editing," Vince joked. "They won't cut you, big boy," Sam assured him. "The ladies need something to look at, too." Inside, Nick felt unexpectedly jealous of Vince. Mike greeted them at the buffet, shaking Nick's hand and giving Annie a friendly, chaste hug. The competitive tension between the men was gone. The crowd buzzed, mostly film crew. Director Hector Salas and financier Blake Davis were deep in conversation. Nick wasn't interested in joining them, but Hector turned his attention to Annie. "You should audition for the next film. You've got the look." Annie laughed off Hector's advance, though he hugged her. She quickly pulled away. He was large, with big hands and an arrogant demeanor, topped with a rather unappealing nose. Nick wasn't worried. Annie could handle herself. The party continued. Nick enjoyed beer and kebabs, while Annie chatted with Vince by the pool, drawing attention. Samantha and Jill approached Nick, who was watching Annie. "Are you worried?" Sam asked. "No. We've come to a new understanding," Nick replied. "How's it going with Vince?" "He's a charmer," Sam said, then added, "and Annie was standing there alone." Nick glanced at Sam, who nodded. "That's about right. He's a rake and knows it. He's already trying to charm Annie," Nick responded. "She's independent. If she messes up, that's on her. And we're done. But I trust her." Sam sighed. "Not exactly what I wanted to hear." "Me neither," Jill agreed. Nick chuckled. "Two stunning movie stars, and they're both annoyed with me. What a life." They separated, and Nick strolled over to Annie and Vince. Vince seemed to be encroaching on her space, so Nick took her hand and asked, "So, Vince, what's it like making a movie?" Vince grinned. "I was just telling Annie, it's hard work, not romantic at all. Except for Sam, of course," he added mischievously. Nick gently led Annie away toward Mike, who stood alone. He didn't mingle much with the film crowd, except for two stuntmen. "How was it on set?" "You were there, right?" Annie asked. "Yeah, for 2 weeks," Mike said. "But it wasn't much fun. Mostly just hanging out with Jill. I left after they wrapped the scenes with her stallion. Thankfully, I didn't have to eliminate him." Nick laughed. "That's good. Things could have gotten ugly." They chuckled. Nick noticed Dirk across the pool, charming a young woman who seemed enthralled. "That's one of the extras they brought in late," Mike commented. "She probably hasn't had to deal with him before. Looks like he's making progress." "I heard from an anonymous source he's very gifted," Annie teased. "No, it wasn't Jill," she quickly added. "But I do have a few other clients who might have mentioned it." "Gifted? What kind of gift are we talking about?" Nick asked. Annie smirked. "I didn't ask for specifics." Nick shrugged. "Fair enough." As the evening progressed, some guests started swimming. Mike stayed on a lounge chair, watching Jill as she floated through the crowd in a shimmering emerald green dress. Nick's attention shifted when Samantha emerged in a bikini and dove into the pool. Her entrance turned heads, particularly the men's. Standing beside Nick, Jill muttered, "Show off." Nick smirked. "You could take a swim too, but I'd have to keep an eye on the guys." Jill grinned. "I will if you do." Annie, overhearing, chimed in, "Just remember, no prolonged physical contact." Nick and Jill went upstairs to find swimwear. Jill tossed him a black Speedo, which he immediately rejected, choosing classic blue trunks instead. "Compromise," he said with a grin. Jill changed into a bikini while Nick watched, appreciating her figure. She noticed his gaze and nodded toward his trunks. Nick started undressing, then hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. Jill teased, "Need help?" "No," he replied quickly. "Please don't. I've got enough going on already." Once ready, they returned downstairs. Jill gracefully dived in near Sam, while Nick impressed the crowd with a perfect somersault from the diving board. The applause, including Annie's, reminded him how desirable he was. But for now, he was hers. Vince approached Annie, complimenting her. "You're as stunning as those two," he said, gesturing to Jill and Sam. Annie smiled politely. "Thank you. But you won't succeed in your mission. You wouldn't like how it ends." Feigning disappointment, Vince flashed a charming smile. Meanwhile, Jill, Sam, and Nick emerged from the pool. Jill announced, "There are swimsuits upstairs if anyone else wants to swim, and the DJ is setting up on the tennis court for dancing." Nick rejoined Annie and Vince as Vince openly admired the women, then surprised Annie by also giving Nick a lingering look. "What does that mean?" Annie whispered to Sam. Sam laughed. "Vince swings both ways. Interesting guy. You might want to keep an eye on Nick." Annie giggled. "If Nick leaves with Vince, I'll go for Mike. Maybe even you two." Jill and Sam, still wet, moved closer to Annie, playfully hugging her from both sides. As if on cue, Annie laughed and pulled away. "Just kidding, girls. Just kidding." Both women feigned such exaggerated disappointment, they burst into laughter. Nick watched, his swim trunks betraying his arousal. The women noticed immediately. Jill grinned mischievously. "Oh, Nick, what's this? You know exactly what it is." "You've seen it before," Nick replied. "Well, I haven't." "It's my turn now," Sam said, grabbing Nick's hand and leading him inside and upstairs. Annie followed, still dressed but damp from Jill's hug. She felt the need to protect Nick from Sam's predatory energy, though a part of her wasn't entirely against what might happen. Things felt dangerously out of control. Jill trailed behind, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. The four ended up in the master bedroom, where Nick had changed before. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," Annie stated matter-of-factly. Jill laughed exuberantly, slipping off her top. Sam, moving confidently, was already undressed before Jill finished. Annie, still in her dress, took a little longer, but soon joined them. Nick stood aside, momentarily stunned by the scene. The charged atmosphere stirred conflicting emotions, drawing him in even as he wrestled with his boundaries. Jill stepped closer to Nick, lightly brushing her hand along his arm. Sam turned to Annie with an affectionate smile, leaning in for a playful kiss. Annie responded briefly before Jill intervened, breaking the moment with a warm but decisive presence, guiding the group back to a lighter mood. "No more chaos," Jill declared, smiling. "This party isn't just for you three. I'm the hostess, and I'm not letting anyone have fun without me." She handed poolside dresses to Sam and Annie, slipping one on herself. Nick, still undressed, stood before them as they admired him. "How should we dress him?" Annie asked, half serious. "Why bother?" Jill quipped. "Because we want him to ourselves," Sam added. "If it comes to that, we'll need to fend off Vince and the other girls." Annie, with a sharp toss, handed Nick his regular swim trunks and a t-shirt. "No agreements were made," she said firmly, cutting off further discussion. Jill and Sam groaned dramatically. The group headed back downstairs to the tennis court where the dancing had begun. Mike walked up to Nick, grinning slyly. "So, have you slept with all three yet?" "No," Nick replied, laughing. "Though we did change clothes up there. Sorry about that." But it was nothing serious. Jill interjected playfully, "Mike, I couldn't help myself. I'm weak." Mike chuckled. I'm willing to trade places with you for tonight. Nick shook his head. Tempting, but no. Jill's incredible, but I just can't. Damn, my mother raised me better than this. Mike laughed harder. Well, at least I'll dance with her. And maybe Sam, too. He took Annie's hand and led her onto the dance floor for a lively jitterbug. Annie glanced back at Nick, who waved her on encouragingly as the evening wore on, the crowd thinned. Jill danced with Vince, and Samantha approached Nick silently, taking his hand and leading him to the dance floor. The DJ transitioned to a slow song, and Nick pulled Sam close. She leaned in, her voice low in his ear. It's time for us, Nick. Mike has Annie, and he'll get her fired up. Jill might stick with Vince. Everything's falling into place. Nick felt his resolve weakening. Sam's touch, her words, the charged atmosphere. It all tested his self-control. He'd resisted earlier, but now he wasn't so sure. The whole evening felt like a grown-up game of spin the bottle. Boundaries blurred, temptations heightened. When the song ended, Sam danced fluidly, her movements hypnotic and provocative. Nick mirrored her energy, their connection palpable. Across the floor, Mike's charm worked on Annie, though he initially held back, mindful of past mistakes. Annie's excitement grew, and Nick gave her a small wave of reassurance, a silent acknowledgement of their complicated understanding. Jill, however, seemed less interested in Vince than expected. Her attention kept shifting between Nick and Sam, and Mike and Annie. The whole dynamic felt like a morally twisted game, and Jill struggled to find her place in it. She imagined various scenarios. If Nick left with Sam, Annie might go upstairs with Mike, and where would that leave her? Would she join Mike and Annie, or follow Nick and Sam? Vince, she realized, might end up alone, but she didn't particularly care. The DJ announced a break. Back in 10, he said, heading for a beer. Left on the dance floor were Nick, Annie, Sam, Mike, Jill, and Vince. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken tension as they gathered around a poolside table. Jill broke the silence. I was just wondering who I'd join first, she said with a sly grin. Annie, holding Mike's hand, froze and glanced at Nick. She saw Sam lounging on a love seat, her legs draped over Nick's lap. A sinking realization struck her. If Sam wanted Nick, she could have him. Annie knew Nick was the only man she wanted. She wasn't willing to share him, not with Sam, Jill, or anyone else. Letting go of Mike's hand, Annie stood abruptly and strode toward Nick. Without hesitation, she leaned down and kissed him deeply. Nick responded immediately, their kiss filled with passion. Sam, still on the love seat, sighed and stood reluctantly, giving Annie space. Annie whispered to Nick, "It's time to go home. We've had enough excitement for one night." Nick groaned softly, caught in the moment, but allowed Annie to pull him close, her arm wrapped protectively around his waist. She turned to the group and declared, "I'm taking him home, where he belongs." Nick retrieved the car keys, but Annie stopped him. "I'll drive," she said firmly. Nick handed them over without protest, still dazed. The drive home was quiet, the air thick with shared understanding, not tension. When they arrived, Annie led Nick to their bedroom, gently undressing him and covering him with her body. Their lovemaking was slow, tender, and deliberate, a reaffirmation of their bond. In that moment, Nick thought of no one else. Annie was all he needed. Sometimes weakness reveals itself, but it's in those moments that the people we love remind us what truly matters. For Nick, it was clear how lucky he was to have Annie keeping him grounded.